Whoa, hey everybody, it's me, Dr. Amanda Kemp, and we're about to begin our Facebook Live tonight for the Stop the Hurt, Stop Implicit Racial Bias 5-Day Challenge. So before we go any further, I'm going to see if I can uh, um, make sure that folks in our Facebook group can see this also. How do I do that? It is always a learning, I have to say. It is always a learning for me. Um, Now, some of you have already been with us, and that's awesome. And for those of you who have not been with us, I want to invite you to join us for the Stop the Hurt, Stop Implicit Racial Bias 5-Day Challenge by signing up. And by that, I mean just giving us a place to send an email to you so that you can get our daily emails. I'm going to put it right over here, I think. I think I can do that. Yeah, okay, so far not too bad. Learn more here. Awesome. Looks like I did something that worked. Okay, cool. And let's hit that button. All right. So today in the Stop the Hurt Challenge, we're focusing on step 2, what you can do to stop the hurt and stop implicit racial bias inside of you. So yesterday I talked about cultivating awareness. And today I want to focus on removing stuff in your environment that implicitly or unconsciously reinforces negative associations with people of color, or that implicitly minimizes or marginalizes people of color. So now some of us might have stuff in our environment that is overtly harmful. But I have a feeling a lot of people in this challenge, especially if you've done it before, which I have, you might have to go another layer to look at what in your environment is harming you, or what in your environment is causing negative associations. So let's look at what's on your walls. Let's talk about what's on your bookshelves. Let's talk about which TV shows you watch. I was in a workshop once, and a European American woman, told me that she has a TV on in the background because she works at home, and she chooses to deliberately put it on African American family shows. Why? Because in her day-to-day experience, she doesn't have much real contact with Black families, and she wanted to have stuff happening and images sort of passively be absorbing stuff that was relatively positive, and that just helped her remember that family doesn't just mean white, which in her role, because of what she had day-to-day contact with, she found as an implicit association that she had. So that's another place. Someone said to me that a music therapist told me that for her, removing stuff also included reordering stuff. So she had, for example, a bin of books, and she noticed that in the front of the bin, it was books by, hey, Brad. In the front of her book bin, she had white authors, and most of the kids that she was serving in this particular community were kids of color. So after she took this training with me, she decided to just reorder her books. And she said literally the same day that she did that, as the young men, teenagers, were filing into her room for music therapy, they actually went to the book bin and took out those books where she had deliberately placed books by people of color in the beginning of the collection. So that's, like, to me, that's one of those very simple, small things you can do. You can look around your house, like take an inventory of your space, your living space. Look at your screen. What is your screensaver promoting? You'll see a TED Talk by Vernae Myers, where she says that one of the ways that we can disrupt the high kind of correlation we have between Black images and negative associations is by actually having regular images of especially Black men in favorable positions. So she talked about, for example, for her, that included like Colin Powell and Dr. Ben Carson and Barack Obama, Thurgood Marshall. And she had a specific emphasis on Black men because she felt like that target group, that demographic, has been especially aligned with ideas of danger and of other kinds of being a threat, somehow super negative, but also dangerous. And hey, Kwame Nkrumah, exactly. So what I encourage you to do, and what she did was, and she talked about putting on your screensaver images. And she also said, and this is kind of interesting, today we're talking about removing items. So I won't tell you what she talked about adding, because this is a real twist. When we think about removing stuff that is undermining our value of equity, our commitment to equality, then we also need to think about, well, what's the relative balance in our spaces of people of color and European Americans? For example, if you have a lot of wall space, which I do, I have to tell you, I'm one of those people who's not a real nester. My husband is the nester in our family. So he's got lots of stuff up in his office. And as you can see, my walls are pretty bare, which I actually kind of like. I'm a little more of a minimalist. But one of the things that that we know is if you have this, even accidentally, you have this overrepresentation of people of European descent in your space, you're sort of unconsciously reinforcing the idea that people of color are marginal, even though, of course, we predominate numerically. And in some cities, we predominate. And in some states, we predominate. But if you the way you have your stuff structured is such that we're missing or we're severely underrepresented, then you're also feeding that prejudice to your mind. And what we know about the mind is that it is, what your conscious thoughts are just a small percentage of what your mind is doing and working with. So we want to be very intentional about what's happening, what we're subconsciously reinforcing with our unconscious minds. Okay, so I also wanted to take some time for questions. And so if you have any questions about how to remove stuff from your space or the difficulties you might encounter when you seek to remove stuff, go ahead and please put them in the comments. So I know in our own family, we had a few conversations about what to put up on the walls, and when had something been up long enough. So my husband, Michael, and I had this extended conversation about a piece of art that he found troubling and a piece of art that I found troubling. He had a print that his mom had given him, and I believe it was I'm forgetting who the artist was now. Not Monet, Chagall, right? And it was an image that I associated with minstrelsy, but we did a little bit of research on it, and the image of the green violinist turns out to be referencing Jewish culture, and Chagall was Jewish and Russian, and or had expanded as part of Russia. So so that was important for me to know. And it was an important piece for Michael because it's obviously he's a violinist and he had a great affection for it, and of course who gave it to him. So we had to have a conversation about it. So I actually think it's super valuable, even if you decide not to take a piece down, to actually talk about it, to raise up the consciousness and the level of conversation that's happening in your space. Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that, Minga. The level of consciousness in your space about what's on the walls. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly here was, what are we listening to? what are the audio cues in our space? And I think this is especially important. What do we need to remove from our audio cues? So I have, okay, so I have teenagers, right? I have European American teenagers, I have African American teenagers. And when I'm in my car with my African American teenagers, which is most often, um, sometimes we talk about the music that they're listening to. So, for example, I was talking with my son and one of his friends, both teenage Black boys at the time, about the N word and the music they were listening to. And and my son's friends said, I think people are just saying it because now they feel like they have to say it. And I said, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was your age, um, it was definitely not used as frequently and as freely, and definitely not in pop culture as much as it's used right now. And so, what I want us to think about is how are certain, I don't know, words, obviously that's a pretty obvious one, but how are certain words being used? And do you want to use those words to talk about people or to convey uh, ideas? For example, some people will say, "Oh, we live in a good neighborhood," or "That's not a good neighborhood. That's a good school. That's not a good school." Um, there are good families who go there, and oh, those are not good families. Like sometimes we use these words, and what we're doing is we're being euphemistic. So I challenge us to be specific about what we're saying, and to ask people to be specific. Hey, Carter, and to ask people to be specific when they're speaking. When you think that they're speaking using euphemisms, like for example, one of my pet peeves is I hate when people say, well, I didn't see anybody there who looked like me. I don't like it when people say that. Number one is because, well, exactly what are you trying to say? They don't look like you in color. They don't look like you in race, gender. Um, what do you mean? And I think the more comfortable we can get saying things like, oh, I didn't see any African American people there, or I only saw European American people there. Or what do we say to our kids when our kids are kids of color, but the only teachers they see are European American? Like, let's get specific. Please, let's stop using euphemisms. One of the problems with using euphemisms is that those tend to be in place, or the way they tend to function is to hide power. The way they tend to function is to get us to not talk explicitly about ism, like racism, like power inequity and disparities. So that's something also to listen for in your day-to-day environment. So I see that Brad is talking about his daughter. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome that you encourage her to own her whole identity, her whole ethnic and racial identity. That's awesome. Um, yeah, Binga just said that euphemisms magnify isms. I think so. And I find that when people can't say certain things, like if they don't say white or white people, then we got a problem, because there's a discomfort with noticing, acknowledging that there's difference, and that there's a meaning, that difference is meaningful. So awesome. Yeah. So, oh, I know we're coming to the end of our time. Here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about what you could remove from your environment, what soundtrack or what landscape, visual scape you can remove from your environment that does not help you to live out your commitment for equity, or remove from your environment anything that undermines subtly or overtly a positive racial identity for kids of color in your space or who visit you. I think, we can go at this on the very obvious level, and then we can get more and more subtle. And so, of course, I encourage you to start where you can see it the best and do that. And as you go, you can get more subtle. So, all right, everybody, thank you for being with us here tonight. And I will see you again tomorrow. Peace and love.